Hello, welcome to our 2025 Trail Bike of the Year test. We whittled down 8 of the latest and greatest trail bikes into these top 3, so stick around to find out which we think is the best trail bike on the market in 2025. Before we start, a big thanks to Auto Trail for sponsoring this year's Bike of the Year. We'll tell you more about their adventure-ready camper vans later on in the video, but let's kick off with a test, Rob. How did it all come about?
So to make it work this year, what we did is we took top picks from me, Alex and Luke Marshall, one of our bike testers. Once we got those, we whittled it down and basically just had to keep riding the bikes until we think we could kind of come up with a top 3. And then obviously you and I went out and hit the trails on these 3 bikes here, just to try and work out which we thought was the best of the bunch. And obviously it got pretty heated. A little bit violent at times. It was quite a tense drive home.
It was, but we got there in the end. And like you say, we have picked a Trail Bike of the Year, and we're going to talk about these 3 bikes in this video, and at the end, discuss the actual winner. So before we get into these 3 bikes, what were the other 5 in the 8 bike test?
So we had the Specialized Stumpjumper, the new model that was launched last year, a Pivot Trailcat LT, Yeti SB140, Santa Cruz Hightower, and a giant Trance X. So over the last 10 months of testing, we were all putting our favorites forward. So that's why they vary in stuff like frame design, build, pricing, the amount of travel they have, different build kits. This year, we've done it in a bit of a different way. It means we've got a real sort of broad spectrum of bikes included, but it also made it super hard to kind of narrow down a winner, which is probably why my hairline's going even further back. My forehead looks bigger. Terrible.
Okay then Rob, talk us through the top 3 bikes.
Right, so here we have the Forbidden Druid 3. This is the second version of the Druid, so the Mark II. This one actually costs £6,299, full carbon frame, high pivot design, all of those things. Super cool bike.
Okay, this one?
This is a rather special bike, the Atherton A.130. So you get the 3D printed titanium lugs bonded into the carbon tubes. This particular build is based on their cheapest model, so it's the A130 but it's not that simple. It's a custom build that they've sent us. So we get an upgraded fork, shock, tires and brakes. So kind of similar, but a little bit different. And ignore the seat post because that is something that I've added because the one that came with it broke.
Cool. The other thing with this one, of course, is the DW6 link, which we will talk about.
Yes, we will.
Very cool. Okay, now this one is a Canyon.
It is a Canyon, Tom, well done. Yes, it's the Spectral AL6. It's the cheapest bike in this test by some margin. Killer build, great trail bike, 140mm travel on the back, horse link pivot, 150 fork, great tires. There's a reason why it's here.
Okay, so that's the top 3. Let's find out though what everyone cares about, how they ride. Okay, so the Canyon Spectral, it's like an archetypal trail bike. It is one of the best known ones on the market. What is it like going up a hill?
So despite this being the heaviest of the trio, at just over 15.5 kilos, it climbs really, really well. The rear suspension props you up really nicely, which means the seat tube angle remains really steep, putting you in a really efficient position that you can just, grind away comfortably at really long climbs without an issue. And it helps as well that while you are pedaling, the shock and suspension stay super stable.
Okay, so it's not wasting energy, sucking into its travel, making it feel like a bit of a sloppy mess.
Yeah, totally. I mean, don't get me wrong, it doesn't feel like a super sprightly, mega lightweight XC bike on the climbs, but you don't feel like you're wasting any of those watts you're putting into the pedals.
So it kind of sounds on, like on a fire road climb, everything's pretty good, but what happens when you get on something a bit more steep and technical?
So for a start, I'd say the suspension probably doesn't work quite as well when you're climbing as it does on the Forbidden or the Atherton.
Okay.
But there's still enough movement to keep the back wheel tracking as you're going over lumps and bumps and stuff like that, which is great. And for me, the long front center, I wasn't ever having any issues with that front wheel lift or wandering or anything like that. So yeah, it still get you up there no matter what.
Sounds like a good, comfortable place to be, fairly efficient, and is going to get you at pretty much anything you're going to find out on the trails.
Exactly.
I'm going to take a minute to tell you about Auto Trail and the Expedition 68, a purpose-built camper van for cyclists. This year's Bike of the Year couldn't have been possible without the support of Auto Trail, the UK's leading motorhome and camper van manufacturer. Auto Trail has more than 40 years of experience pushing boundaries, embracing cutting-edge technology and designing solutions to enhance the van life experience. And the good news for you as a rider? Auto Trail's Expedition 68 range is designed for mountain bikers front of mind. The range includes 3 models, all with an integrated bike garage and pull-out bike trays. It's a no-compromise camper van for cyclists who want to head out into the countryside to explore new terrain with convenience and comfort. With a 140 brake horsepower engine as standard, 200-watt solar panels, a 75 amp-hour leisure battery and a pop-top roof option, the Expedition 68 is designed to unleash your sense of adventure. Head to autotrail.co.uk for more information or click the link in the description. Thanks again to Auto Trail for sponsoring this year's Bike of the Year test. Now back to the video.
Of the 3 bikes here, the Forbidden Druid looks like it might be slightly harder work on the climbs.
Not necessarily. I'd say, you know, it does have a smaller rear wheel, so maybe you don't get some of the benefits you would on a 29er. But the reality is that forecaster rear tyre seems to roll pretty quick, and I didn't feel a whole ton of drag or anything through the idler, really. In all honesty, there's no real downsides to it. I would say maybe you get a bit of noise when it gets grotty and muddy and stuff like that, but it's not that sort of really noticeable effect that I think some people worry it might be. There is a bit more bob from the back end compared to the Canyon on smoother climbs, on fire roads or tarmac drags and stuff like that. But I would take that when it comes to actually getting onto technical uphills where this thing really excels.
Okay.
It's super sensitive. The back end just works so well and keeps the rear tyre glued to the track. It just perfectly mimics the trail. So it just means everything you put in, you get out.
It looks like it's got quite a steep seat angle, and I know we talk about this quite a lot in climbing because it really affects how the bike feels underneath you. Is that maintained when you're going up something steep, or how does it change?
Yeah, more or less. I'd say, so I've set this bike up with a touch more than 30% sag, which means that it does hunker down into its travel a little bit more when you're spinning the pedals compared to the Canyon especially, maybe a little bit compared to the Atherton as well. You know, you remain comfortably over the BB and you can just, you know, spin on from there.
Okay, let's talk about the Atherton. Okay, so Atherton, a name that is synonymous with going down hills very, very fast, but have they made a bike that can go up them?
Yes. In short, they can, and they've done a really, really good job with this. So it is super supple off the top, all of those great things you want, nice and sensitive back end, all of this blah, 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 blah. But do you know what, when you start pedaling, this thing is the sprightliest of the bunch. Even though it has Enduro spec tyres on, it feels the easiest going up the hill. The DW6 seems to do everything they promise. It sits stably while you're pedaling. It's a really steep seat angle, over 78 degrees, so you are perched up forwards, quite upright.
I was surprised when I rode it, just how both comfortable and yet efficient it does feel. It seems to do everything really well.
Right, exactly, and that's the thing, you know, it's just under 15 kilos, but it doesn't feel like that when you're riding it.
Fair to say that in terms of climbing then, this one really is sort of top dog?
They're all really good at riding uphill.
In their own way?
Yeah, totally. But all things considered, I'd say this is the one I'd pick. If I had a mountain to climb, this is the one I'm grabbing.
Cool. As we said, a trail bike has to perform on more mellow flowing trails. So how does the Atherton do here?
Well, do you know what? All 3 bikes bring something slightly different, but of the 3 of them, I would say the Atherton is the one that feels the most urgent and athletic. It's so direct in terms of when you put that power down, it really does just go. And it's the same when it comes to pumping undulations, or, you know, when you gap a section, you hit a little downside. As soon as you weight the bike through your feet, it just wants to go forwards. It's so easy to just keep that speed, keep that momentum building as you go down the track. And that's great because some of the stuff on, you know, long trail center laps can get a little bit like hard work sometimes.
So it sounds like it's pretty good on the fast flowing trail centre stuff, but what happens when things get a little bit more nibbly?
That's a good question again. I think this bike, super agile. It feels really nimble. Kind of what I was saying before, it's very direct in terms of what you put in, you kind of get out. So as long as you're able to pick your way on the right lines and stuff like that, this will just go wherever you need it to. It's really reactive. It's easy to change lines on. You don't get lost in the travel. I mean, it's really supportive and it works super well, but you can properly just pick it up, place it where you want. you know, it just feels very precise.
It does have the steepest head angle of all the bikes here. Does that play into it?
Yeah, maybe that does play a small part in it, but I think with the reach you can get on a bike like this, and you know, it's offered in so many different sizes, you can really, literally get whatever you want, that as long as it's, you know, a decent enough length, it still feels stable and secure. You don't feel like you're about to get, you know, thrown out the front door anytime soon.
Great. Okay, so the high pivot Druid, what's this going to be like on slightly more mellow terrain?
So, even though it still accelerates really well and it has a, you know, a decent turn of speed, I would say when it comes to pumping and popping through stuff, you have to work this a little bit harder. The back end doesn't feel quite as taut as it does on the Atherton or the Canyon. So to gain that momentum or to gain that speed through just, you know, loading the pedals, you just have to try a bit harder. You know, Luke described it as the downhill as trail bike, and I completely agree with him. That's where it shines more than anywhere else. So on the flat stuff, it still goes, but you have to just work it a bit harder, I think.
I guess having that forecaster gives it a little bit more zip than it might otherwise have had if it had a chunkier tyre that maybe would fit the build a little more obviously.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, the forecaster is one of my favourite tyres on like an aggressive XC bike, for example. Here it still does the job really well. I think it helps that it rolls pretty quick, but I think, you know, come winter, I would be changing that to something a little bit more aggressive.
Okay. Finally, the Canyon Spectral, how does it perform?
So on mellower single track, accelerating out of tight corners, this bike doesn't feel quite as urgent as the other two, but saying that, it's no massive surprise. It's a chunk heavier, but then of course it costs way less, so it's no big deal really in the scheme of things. But let me just make it clear, as soon as you do get up to speed, this thing holds it incredibly well. It manages to maintain that pace impeccably. And when you do add those rider inputs, it just translates into forward momentum. It really does go. It might mean it's not quite as nimble or maybe dynamic to ride as the other bikes, but there's a calmness and it's so quiet and composed. It's just a fantastic bike on these sorts of trails.
Okay. Keeps your momentum, keeps you rolling fast. But let's go and see what they're like on an actual descent. You described the Forbidden Druids as the downhill as trail bike, so I'm assuming on the descents this is an absolute beast.
That's right, get it pointed downhill and this thing is amazing. I mean, don't get me wrong, it doesn't have quite the same level of zip on the mellower tracks as the Atherton or maybe even the Spectral to some degree, but pointed downhill and it really shines. I think it helps the fact it has that, you know, high pivot, rearward axle path, the super smooth suspension, which just seems to work flawlessly in the sense that it gives you what feels like more than 130 mil of travel, and it means you can ride it more like an enduro bike. So even though it's sort of quite light and poppy in comparison to a big travel like enduro bike is now, it feels like it just, you know, it can truck through stuff really, really well.
Okay, you mentioned that the rear triangle extends under compression as it's got that high pivot, so it gets longer.
Yeah.
What does that feel like? Is it a bit weird?
So it only grows by 20 mil,
okay,
which I suppose in the scheme of things it sounds like quite a bit, but in all honesty, unless you're super in tune with it, you only really notice it. Well, I only really noticed it when I was sort of really loading up through well-supported corners. And you sort of feel like it can extend a little bit, but you still feel really well centered in the bike. And the only time I would say it had any kind of negative effect was when I was just learning to manual.
Okay.
Because it does that, you need to, you know, yank on the bars a bit harder to get the front wheel up. Mm-hmm. But other than that, yeah, it doesn't feel quirky or strange in any way. And I think the advantage is that when you do take on tracks with nasty sort of square edge hits or ugly braking bumps, where some trail bikes really can come unstuck, the way in which the suspension works properly scalps those edges. So it smooths it out and it keeps everything a bit more composed.
Wicked, okay, well it sounds like Forbidden have done a really good job on the descending characteristics of the Druid. Sounds like a bit of a machine. Let's talk about the Canyon. The Spectral is the cheapest bike in the test. Does that mean down a hill it doesn't hold its pace?
No, not at all. It's absolutely brilliant down a hill. It's slack, long, super fast, holds its speed really well. It maybe doesn't soak up the hits in the same way that the Druid does, but it absorbs them enough and mutes them that you can just, you know, attack the trail like you would want to do. And do you know what? It rides like a bike that's easily twice the price.
Okay, I mean, it's a classic 4-bar suspension linkage in there, and if you look at the dampers, they're, you know, they're not the factory ones, but they're good stuff front and back, plenty of adjustment.
Exactly. I mean, on a £2,799 bike, there is nothing I would change on here.
Okay.
You can roll this, get it straight out of the box, go ride, race, whatever you want to do. It's a really, really great bike.
So it sounds like it's going to be pretty good down most tracks, but what happens when you get into like the real slow, janky stuff?
I would say maybe it's not quite as agile as the other bikes, but it's by no means a slouch when it comes to that sort of stuff. It's still just a really composed, stable, safe ride, I think. So you can really, really push it. You know, it's got a little bit more travel than the other bikes. So I guess that comes with a bit of peace of mind too. So, you know, that sort of get out of jail free card almost. And what's crazy is it's a really quiet ride as well, which it sounds like a really silly thing, but it kind of gives it that sort of more expensive feel to it. There's no geometry adjustment, there's nothing to play with in that sense. So it's quite simplistic compared to a lot of modern trail bikes which have tons of stuff you can tweak and fiddle with.
Right, the A130, tell us a little bit about it.
Well, do you know what? I'm going to flip it on its head because I know that you loved this bike when we rode it.
That is true. When we did our back-to-back testing days with these three bikes, this was the one that really stood out to me. You know, the Canyon, it's a classic 4-bar trail bike. It does everything pretty well and it is really well priced. It's just a little bit weighty. The Druid, it's a cool bike and it really works when you're going down a hill, but everywhere else, I didn't really get the vibe off it. This one just seemed to do pretty much everything that I think a trail bike has to do with this sort of magic quality that's really difficult to describe. So I'm going to leave you to do that.
Okay, so I first rode this when Luke was testing it. It had a slightly different setup, so a RockShox fork and a super deluxe shock. Honestly, it blew me away. First time I rode it down like an old school downhill track and I couldn't believe how good it was. It has that sort of, you know, we've talked about the 6-bar linkage, but that manages to deliver everything from sensitivity, support, and then all the control later in the travel. And we're only talking 130 mil of travel. And don't get me wrong, if you really take it to, you know, the extremes, you can get that 130 mil, you know. But the bike never really feels out of control. It's so well balanced. It's super predictable. And I think some of that predictability comes in the fact that, like you pointed out when we're riding, it's really good on the braking.
Every time, you know, whenever you put those brakes on, the rear wheel, it doesn't stiffen up. You know, every suspension design says, oh yeah, we can isolate this, whatever. This actually isolates braking forces from the suspension. And you come into sort of chattery downhills where you're sort of trying to keep the wheels, you know, slow down. And it just tracks the ground and slows you down. It just does its job.
And I think that, and then the fact that there's the size range. So you can pretty much get any reach you want, or if you want to go even crazier, you can pay to have a custom frame made. For these particular frames, you do need deep pockets. You know, you're talking 4,700 just for the frame alone, maybe a little more in fact. But Luke sort of said about it when he reviewed it that this bike pushes boundaries, and in many ways, I think in terms of trail bikes, it does. It's really cool. It's such an exciting bike to ride.
All right, we've talked about the riding, but we do need to talk about the specs on the bike. So let's start with the Canyon.
Yeah, so the Canyon, it comes, well, obviously we have the aluminium one here. Canyon do also make a carbon version, and they do a ton of different build kits. So there's pretty much, you know, whatever your price range, they should have it covered. This particular build though, it uses a Fox Performance Elite 36 fork. That means you get all the adjustment you do on the factory one without the Kashima coated legs. A Performance Flow X shock, which is a great shock, pretty basic in a lot of ways, but does the job perfectly well, as does the Shimano SLX drivetrain and brakes. The key thing here is they've absolutely nailed the tyre spec in terms of not just compound, both triple compound tyres, but also you get a tougher rear casing. So, you know, in theory, it's durable and will last a ride. You aren't going to get just a super lightweight tyre so the bike feels light in the showroom and then it just, you know, rips to shreds when you first go out. So the Canyon comes in at £2,799.
Okay.
Now the Forbidden is £6,299, so a good chunk extra. Forbidden only make the Druid in carbon, so obviously there's a chunk of money there. This particular model, out of so they offer three, I should have said really. This one comes with the RockShox Lyric and Super Deluxe shock, both of the Select Plus category. So you still get a ton of adjustment, there's still great dampers. It uses the SRAM Eagle 90 mechanical drivetrain, and again, great tyre spec. We sort of talked about the slightly faster rolling forecaster rear tyre, but again, it's in the tougher carcass, so it should, you know, withstand a fair bit of abuse, which is fantastic.
And there's an NASA guy up front.
Exactly.
But what is your favourite thing?
So one of my highlights here, I think the spec's great, but the Maven brakes really stand out. You know, they were designed as like a proper gravity, you know, downhill enduro stopper. So to see them on a 130 trail bike, fantastic. Yeah, I love a good set of brakes, yeah.
Finally is our custom spec Atherton A130.
Like I said at the start, this is based loosely around their cheapest number 3 or 3 model, whatever you call it, but with quite a few tweaks. So we've gone for Cryptotel tyres in the enduro casing, so a bit tougher, maybe don't roll as quick as the, I don't know, more XC oriented tyres that they might put on. We've also got a 36 SL fork on the front, so a bit lighter than the standard 36 you might see elsewhere, and sometimes I think they spec it with a 34 as well. A factory float shock, so not piggyback one. All of these things are sort of interchangeable. As far as I'm aware, they do quite a lot of customization options, so you can upgrade this, that, the other. Yes, it's expensive, but I'm sure there's ways around some of those, you know, saving some cash elsewhere. You know, fundamentally you're paying for the frame. That's the most expensive bit there, and probably the, you know, I think we could easily argue the most exciting bit, right?
Highlight. 7396 for this one that we've got, is that right? Yes,
that's right. So it's not cheap by any stretch, but I mean, it's a hell of a bike.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the shape of the bikes, because geometry is fundamental.
Well, yeah, you can't change it, right? Like you can change a fork or shop. Yeah, so the Atherton, which we've already sort of mentioned, 22 sizes. There's a custom option as well. I took the size 8 with, I think it was the size 8 regular, which is a 460mm reach, which is spot on for me. Change days are pretty short for 433, but those change as you go up the sizes, which is really cool. 29-inch wheels, front and rear, 65.5-degree head angle, which is kind of steep. If it's a problem, get a custom frame made. If you've got the cash, brilliant. I measured the seats tube to sit actually over 78 degrees, so super steep. That's because my saddle runs pretty low because I've got tiny legs.
Okay, next up, the Forbidden.
Yep, so Forbidden sell that in 4 different sizes. I took the S2, which has a reach of 455mm, chain stays at 437, but don't forget, technically that's going to grow. All bottom bracket heights on the bikes measuring at just under 335mm off the ground, which is pretty low for a trail bike. And it has a 64.5-degree head angle.
Okay, let's talk about the Canyon.
Okay, so the Canyon is the longest here, in medium anyway. They do a small and an extra small if the 475 reach on the medium is too long for you. The chainstay length stays the same across all sizes at 437mm, and the head angle is actually super slack at 64.2 degrees. Yeah, so pretty raked out.
Yeah. Okay, Rob, so we are at the end of the video, and this is the bit that I know you've been dreading, but you do have to pick a trail bike of the year for 2025. Which is it going to be?
Well, I mean, you've been part of the process, so you know.
I know the answer.
Well, and you know how much we've agonised over this, and it hasn't been pleasant. It's so tough. Look, I think if you ride downhill and you're into that sort of thing, you cannot go wrong with the Druid. Okay, maybe it doesn't have quite as much zip as the other bikes when it comes to the mellower bits of trail and track, but you know, if you're looking for another bike to cover a load of miles and really give you a lot of smiles on the downhill, it's got to be the Druid. If budget is a real sort of thing, which it is for pretty much everyone, just get the Spectral. It does everything really well. It really is a proper generalist, but, and this pains me to say because I am so painfully tight with my money, and this is a very expensive bike, but it's a very, very special bike. I think you'll agree, right?
Yeah, 100%. You know, it's got this magic quality. The suspension is incredible. The options that are available is pretty insane. You know, you are riding the forefront of mountain bike technology. When you're out and about, people come talk to you about this bike, which isn't the most important thing, but it's a very, very cool bit of kit.
And more than that, it rides so incredibly. It is just, you know, it's an incredible ride. There's so much sort of feel to it. It works so well. And, you know, we're in such a privileged position that we can go to the workshop, pick any bike we want, and this is going to be the one I'm going to grab. You know, and the fact that they do the different travel options as well, like a lot of brands, but you know, you can jump up 20mm to the 150 if this isn't quite enough. But for me, in terms of what makes a trail bike, this thing it really is the epitome of it.
Okay, well there we have it. The Atherton A130 is our 2025 trail bike of the year. Now of course there's going to be plenty of comments, so drop them down below and give us a like and a subscribe if you haven't done already. Now a few months ago I went all the way up to McCunthorth in North Wales to see how Atherton build the incredible A200G World Cup downhill bike with its pinion gearbox. It was a very cool visit and the video is on screen right now. Rob, congratulations, you finished Trail Bike of the Year 2025. We can all go home and relax for a little bit. Well done.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching. We'll be back with more stuff in the future.